Hi everyone, welcome to the video. This is about scientist Albert Einstein and the comedian that he wanted to meet. The comedian's name is Sid Caesar, and what Sid Caesar did is live sketch comedy on NBC television in the 1950s. Einstein was so impressed that he wanted to meet Sid Caesar, as you'll hear about in just a moment in this video. But in case you've never heard of Sid Caesar, when Sid Caesar died in 2014, many tributes came in. Here is a good, typical example of the tributes to Sid Caesar on his passing.
We got news just a few hours ago that comedy legend Sid Caesar passed away. And I wanted to speak about this very briefly because when I was a kid, growing up in Brookline, Massachusetts, my father one day took me to the Hearthstone Plaza in Brookline Village to see something called 10 from Your Show of Shows. You ever heard of that? And it was Sid Caesar's greatest sketches from Your Show of Shows, which was his sketch show in the 1950s, all put together, the best of them, as a movie. And I didn't know what my dad was talking about. He said, "You got to see this." I don't know how old, I might have been 10 years old, 11. He took me, lights go down, I watched this. And when it was over, I thought to myself, I don't know what that guy's doing, but I want to do that.
Yeah.
It was so powerful to me. He was so funny. He was so great. Acknowledged by pretty much everybody who ever worked with him as the funniest person ever.
Yeah.
And influenced an entire generation, and everything that anybody's doing in comedy today, you could probably trace it all back to Sid Caesar. So I just want to say to young people who are maybe watching right now, go online, look up some of Sid Caesar's sketches, because the best way to remember him is through his work. He was great.
So what Sid Caesar created were a series of shows, Your Admiral Theater, Your Show of Shows, and Caesar's Hours, which were all basically the same thing. They were sketch comedy done in front of an audience in New York City. It was the big bang of television comedy and is still being recognized and acknowledged today. In fact, it would be perfectly accurate if in 1948 and 49, if they would have started the show with this line.
And now, live, kinda, from all across America, it's Saturday night.
So a really good starting point is during one of the rehearsals for Caesar's Hour, and during this rehearsal, his secretary came up to him with a very important message. Here's the story of that message, which I think you're going to like a lot.
There was one time I was in rehearsal, and we were a little behind, and I was trying to push the rehearsal faster and faster, and my secretary walked in and said, "Dr. Einstein is on the phone." I said, "Who?" She said, "Dr. Albert Einstein is on the phone."
Vinny Einstein, right?
I said, all right, and I looked at the writers, and I said, "It's all right, the joke is over because, you know, we got a lot of work to do." And my secretary said, "No, Dr. Einstein's on the phone, wants to talk to you." And I said, "He doesn't know I'm alive. I mean, Dr. Einstein?" She said, "No, he's on the phone." So I went up and I went to the phone, and sure enough, Helen Dukas was on the phone, and she said, "Dr. Einstein would like to speak to you." And I said, "When? How? Where?" You know. She said, "Made an appointment at 12 Mercer Street in Princeton." And I told my secretary right away as I hung up, I said, "Go out and get me every book on relativity because I got a bone up on it over the weekend." And I remember I was looking forward to seeing him, and unfortunately he passed away before I could see him. And it was a great disappointment to me because I would just sit at his feet and listen to what he had to say because he was my hero. And about a year or so later, I was giving a lecture in Columbia University. I was walking down the hall, and a little man came up to me and said, "Pardon me, you're Sid Caesar, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I'm Robert Oppenheimer." I said, "Robert Oppenheimer?" "Yes." He said, "Albert talked a lot about you." I said, "He did?" He said, "Yes." He said, "He had solved the human equation. I mean, he solved the physical equation, EMC squared. He wanted to talk to you about the human equation, about how people react." And I said, "Albert Einstein knew about me?" He said, "Yes. He loved you." And that to me was the epitome of my life.
The fact that Einstein had a sense of humor is very well known, as you can see in this picture. But what was surprising to me is that Einstein died in 1955, Sid Caesar died in 2014, and in that nearly 60-year interval, not one person, as best I can tell, asked Sid Caesar, "Hey, Sid Caesar, Dr. Einstein wanted your answer to what is the answer to the human equation?" Nobody asked him that. It's not in any interviews, not in anything he published, none of the TV shows, anything. So, the rest of this video is my best answer, based on the evidence that you'll see of what Sid Caesar would have told Einstein. This is the answer to the human equation, based on what Sid Caesar actually knew. We're going to take a look at 10 features or values and compare how science would answer those questions versus how Sid Caesar did. So, let's start with, what is the most important thing?
I tell the truth, and that to me is the best comedy. Comedy about truth is exaggerate the truth with a little curlicue on the end. And then people understand because they relate to what you're talking about. They understand, they feel what you're talking about because it is the truth. And the truth never fails because you don't have to do topical humor, you do things about what happens to people every day.
Sid Caesar was insistent in interviews and shows and all kinds of things that comedy has to tell the truth. That was by far the most important. It could be words, skits, pantomimes, physical, facial expressions, all kinds of things, but it had to be the truth. He was also insistent on having a very, very, very broad range of experiences, as this clip shows.
Just don't try to do stand-up. You know, stand-up is fine, but it's unfortunately today it's when you go to a comedy store, and there's some brilliant minds out there, truly, but it's one stand-up after another stand-up after another stand-up. All you have to do is get a couple of chairs and a table. You have a sketch, and you can relate to somebody, and you can make it. You can branch out. You can broaden. It doesn't have to be just stand-up comedy. It can be character comedy. It can be improvisation. It can be anything you want. But comedy should be broadened out. There's pantomime to be done. There's double talk to be done. There are so many things, so many areas of comedy that are not covered today, unfortunately.
Sid Caesar was also absolutely rock-solid consistent on the source of the best ideas. Let's hear his answer directly from him.
Where did your ideas from characters begin?
Well, actually, we just picked them up. I would see them on the street or see them anywhere. I would take from people. Because when we sat down, you know, when we first started the shows for an hour and a half, I said to Max Liebman, I said, you know, we got an hour and a half to fill here. You know, I know a few routines, but that's about all. Well, where are we going to get the material? And the main thing was to come from people. And that's where I started. It's just watching people. I would sit and just watch people do things. And then just exaggerate a little bit. And that, to me, is where all the material should come from people, because people relate to people. They don't relate to things. Mm-hmm. And people are funny, not things.
There are several interviews with Sid Caesar where he talks about the importance of the audience reaction, and that's what actually matters most. And you'll hear that in just a moment in this interview. One of the other things that's very true is that science looks for one best answer, like how do you calculate the distance from the Earth to the Sun, whereas comedy is always on more than one level. And here is one of the writers that Sid Caesar hired, Mel Brooks, talking about how wonderful that was.
You know, Sid was kind of a revelation to me, because when I saw him working both, you know, I saw him in the Borscht Belt, and I saw him on the stage of the Roxy, and I saw him do a single on the floor of the Copacabana nightclub in New York. And Sid, we all did, we, the Henny Youngmans of the world, we all did Good Evening, Ladies and Gentlemen. I met a girl who was so thin. This girl was so skinny. I took her to a nightclub, and the maitre d' said, "Check your umbrella. That's how skinny." That was comedy. And you know, we got our laughs and we were happy. And then Sid came on the scene and did an impression of human behavior, which was deeper and funnier and richer. And I said, I'm going to stick with him.
There are lots of wonderful stories about the writers in Caesar's Hour and Your Show of Shows, and how they made connections that were just incredibly crazy far apart, but it worked. And that mattered because the consequences mattered, and that's what you're going to hear in the next video clip in just a second. Do it live, and there are immediate consequences, whereas in academics, obviously, it's going to take a long time. So you check the validity in comedy from the audience, whereas in science, obviously, it's a peer review. And here's a really great example of that for Sid Caesar.
I must tell you one thing. We did it live. I'll give you something on it.
I once was giving a lecture in Columbia University, and all the people there were from show business. I mean, some part of the television directors and, and this and that and this and writers and go. And I talked to them and I said, now I throw this floor open to open questioning. And the first guy that stands up asks me, Mr. Caesar, we understand the show is an hour and a half long and that you did it live. But could you tell me, how long did it take to shoot the show? And I said, about 90 minutes. And he said, what if you do, what happens if you don't get any laughs? I said, then you go a little faster. But they had no idea what live was. Live was right there, you know. You don't need any critics to tell you if you were good or not. The audience is telling you right now whether you're doing well or not. And the audience is always the final judge, because they're the ones that buy the tickets. They're the ones that come to want to see you. And you have to break with them, you have to be with them. So you never forget the audience. Always keep the audience involved.
Another point on which Sid Caesar was very insistent was how you tell the narrative. In science, there's a scientific way of writing, but Sid Caesar didn't use that. He said these have to be stories that people can relate to. And in terms of timing, there is obviously in academics, you need to be the first to publish, of course, but in comedy, timing is everything. And here's an excellent example of Sid Caesar demonstrating unbelievably good comedic timing.
Now, a lot of people may not know that you started early on, you were a saxophone player, and a very accomplished saxophone player. And what made the transition from Sid Caesar the musician to Sid Caesar the comedian?
Money.
It would be nothing to do a whole video just on his timing in that one word, and he didn't, walk over the audience reaction, none of that kind of stuff. Really, really class act. And Sid Caesar was also extremely insistent that he have the best writing team of all time. They were extremely, extremely, extremely competitive. And here are a couple of examples of what it was like to be one of the writers for the Show of Shows and Caesar's Hours. Again, widely regarded as the best comedy writing team of all time.
If you look at the writers that were attracted to this flame, I'd like to go down the list.
Yeah, run them down.
And let me not miss anybody. First starting with Mel Tolkien, Lucille Callan, then people who have passed away like Tony Webster, who wrote a few Broadway shows and wrote Bilko. Joe Stein, who wrote Fiddler on the Roof, Take Me Along, Zorba, Enter Laughing, among others, and Juno and the Paycock. Juno, I just saw it. And Mike Stewart, who wrote Hello, Dolly, Bye Bye Birdie, Candide. Larry Gelbart, who wrote MASH on Broadway, The Forum. And the Barbarians at the Gate, he just adapted, among men, Tootsie. Let's not forget anybody else. Aaron Rubin, who did the Andy Griffith Show and Gomer Pyle.
Neil Simon.
Neil and his brother.
What did he do?
Neil and Danny Simon started together. Danny Simon became a director and a teacher, but Neil Simon, I haven't heard from. I don't know what he's done.
Woody Allen.
He hasn't done anything in about 3 weeks, Neil Simon. Woody Allen was 18 years old and came in the last year for some specials.
And the genius of them all.
And Max Kaminsky here.
Yes.
We could not go near sex. Pregnant was a dirty word.
You couldn't be political like they are now.
You couldn't go. You could be a generic politician, but you couldn't zero in on any one politician, or either a Republican or Democrat. Couldn't go anywhere near it. A generic, it's okay, maybe. And you couldn't go anywhere near religion. You couldn't talk about it or touch it, which I think is okay, because it forced us to be ingenious. We had to get the laugh. We couldn't go for a cheap joke. We couldn't go for a shock joke. And we couldn't go for something that's, a little off. So we had to be funny on our own. And this is what I'm talking about. The fun has to come from the people. Things are not funny. People are funny.
But to go back to the writing in the room, there was such energy, so much competition, topping each other. When you have Neil Simon topping Mel Brooks and Mel Brooks topping Neil Simon and Larry Gelbart topping them both.
Were these people, did they have compatible personalities?
No. No.
Fights?
Yeah, there would be arguments. I mean, real fights, because there was a tremendous pride taken in the show. We compared ourselves to Broadway. We tried to, emulate that. We didn't do it all the time, but we got pretty good. And there was a tremendous pride in the show because it was instant. It was right on. It was live. As you did it, you walked out the door. You knew right there if the show was going over. Like here, you can tell if they don't have to tell you. The show was pretty good.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. And the people tell you, because the people are the ones that you work for, and they're the ones who give you the warmth that I'm going around now and feeling.
How would you like to be remembered?
I brought laughter to the world.
That's it. Simple enough.
Sid Caesar never gave a formula that you could list as the human equation, but obviously you can see from all these videos what these specific values, or in psychology they're called traits, are that explain the human condition, the kind of values we have, as in truth, what we look for truth, where we get it, how we test it, how we validate it, what we do with consequences, how we check the validity of that, all the stuff about timing, and then the people you have on your team. These are all things that Sid Caesar would tell you, and did, as you heard in these excerpts, are going to make an enormous difference in terms of the human equation. I've never found anybody who answered that question that Dr. Einstein wanted to give to Sid Caesar. If there are any previous answers, please let us know in the comments. And if you can expand or correct or connect on any of this, feel free to do so, because I think that Einstein's question to Sid Caesar is extremely important. What actually is the human equation? And from what Sid Caesar knew and could tell, I think this is the most correct, complete answer that Sid Caesar would have given Einstein if, in fact, Einstein would have lived long enough for that meeting to take place. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you had a good time, laughed, learned a few things, and look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye now.